A quiet highway stop turned into something no one expected. Stay with us until the end to see the full truth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The morning sun crawled over the pines like a slow flame, laying long bars of light across I-20 as Officer Ryan Miller polished a fingerprint from the chrome buckle of his duty belt. 28, squared jaw, boots mirror shined. He studied his reflection in the cruiser's window until the face looking back seemed as hard and uncomplicated as the badge on his chest. He told himself that face was a protector's. He tried not to think about the $800 he owed Vince Maroney by Friday. Claiborne County didn't look like much from the highway. 2 exits, a shuttered diner with a peeling neon sign, a truck stop, a pawn shop, and churches enough to absolve the whole state if they ever agreed on the same hymn. For Ryan, it was a ledger that never balanced. The note on the lifted F-150 in his driveway. The mortgage on the tidy ranch house with gray siding and a porch swing Melissa had chosen because it looked civilized. The ring Melissa had wanted and he'd bought because a woman who could make his living room look like a magazine made the rest of him look better too. He could afford all of it, as long as his arrest numbers stayed high and his side money stayed quiet. Captain Frank Howard had stood in front of the whiteboard at yesterday's briefing with a coffee he never drank and a smile that never reached his eyes. "We need numbers this month," he'd said, capping a marker with a click that felt like a period. "City Council wants to see we're proactive. Keep the complaints to a minimum." Howard's glance had settled on Ryan in that way men used when saying something without saying it. The same glance he gave whenever Ryan turned in a report with an unusually neat pattern of facts. Furtive movements, strong odor, inconsistent statements. The same glance he'd given when evidence weights didn't exactly match, and the explanation was a clerical error no one had the energy to chase. Ryan slid behind the wheel, radio humming low. He told dispatch he was rolling eastbound. He sipped gas station coffee that tasted like scorched dirt and told himself today would be ordinary. A couple of speeding tickets, a consent search, maybe a cash seizure to patch the Vince problem. He told himself what he always did. It wasn't about the money, it was about the mission. Get bad product off the road. Keep the highways safe. He didn't say out loud that bad product sometimes started in a zip-top bag he kept beneath the trunk mat. He had a system. It had taken 6 years to polish and 2 to stop feeling like a crime. Look for older sedans with out-of-state plates. Look for drivers alone, preferably men, preferably those who would think twice about pushing back in a county where a trooper's word weighed more than theirs. An air freshener on the mirror? Probable cause's best friend. Drift within the lane? Erratic. Tinted windows? Officer safety. If all else failed, the jacket trick, place the department windbreaker over the cruiser's dash cam for a moment, sun glare, and then moved the chess pieces where they needed to be moved. By mid-morning, the radio had spit out a handful of routine calls. Disabled vehicle at mile marker 62, debris in the eastbound slow lane, a minor fender bender outside a feed store. Ryan made a show of presence. Parked on a median, lights off, letting speeders flash past, then pulling one unlucky man in a carpenter's van who apologized 3 times before Ryan even reached the window. The van smelled like sawdust and cheap coffee. The driver's kids' drawings were taped to the glove compartment. Ryan wrote a warning and told himself mercy counted too. Noon baked the asphalt until heat shimmered like water in the distance. He grabbed a burger at the truck stop and ate it in the cruiser with the windows cracked, listening to weather chatter and thinking about Melissa's new idea for a girls' trip to Destin that he'd nodded at without listening. The math in his head stayed bad. 800 by Friday, and Vince had stopped smiling when Ryan said next week. By late afternoon, the light turned honey-colored and longer, the day thinning into itself. That was when the navy blue Peterbilt eased over the rise, chrome clean enough to blind. The rig's paint carried a quiet pride. No gaudy decals, just a small white logo near the cab doors and Louisiana plates streaked with dust. Ryan sat up. Out of state, immaculate equipment, solo driver. The kind of confidence that made his teeth itch. He pulled out, closed the distance, and paced the truck in the passing lane. The driver saw him in the mirror and signaled a lane change with textbook precision. No weave, no drift. The hazard lights clicked on before Ryan even hit his bar lights. The truck eased to the shoulder and stopped perfectly straight, wheels kissing the white line but not crossing it. The kind of stop instructors used in videos. Through the open window of the cab, Ryan saw him. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, black, salt and pepper hair cropped close, wire-rimmed glasses that made his eyes look thoughtful rather than tired. The man's posture was the kind that came from years of work, shoulders broad, back straight without arrogance. His hands were already at 10 and 2 on the wheel, fingers relaxed, not white-knuckled. The cab was neat. Clipboard clipped, thermos in a cup holder, a stack of logs and bills of lading within reach. Clayburn to 2:14. Dispatch crackled as Ryan keyed his mic. Go ahead. 10:38 on an 18-wheeler, eastbound shoulder near mile marker 74. Louisiana plate, Lima Foxtrot. He read out the sequence, heard keys tapping on the other end. Occupant 1. Copy 2:14. Stand by. He adjusted his hat, smoothed his tie, checked that the body cam indicator glowed steady blue. He could recite the next steps in his sleep. He told himself the tail lamp on the trailer looked hairline cracked. He told himself the truck had touched the fog line a minute back. He told himself a lot of things that would read clean in a report. The window rolled down smoothly as he approached. The driver's voice, when it came, was a deep baritone softened by Louisiana. Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why you stopped me today? Ryan disliked the tone immediately. Not because it was rude, because it wasn't. Calm, measured, the kind of voice people used when they'd rehearsed being polite all their lives because the alternative could become dangerous. He heard no tremor. He saw no darting eyes to latch onto as suspicious. The calm felt like a statement. License, registration, proof of insurance, Ryan said, no greeting. He angled his body slightly, letting the glare catch the body cam, knowing how sunlight could wash a frame. And your CDL and logs. Reaching into the glove box, the man narrated, moving deliberately, as if reading from a manual that called for narration. Papers came out precise. Laminated insurance card, fresh registration, a clean Louisiana license. The man handed over a leather wallet with a CDL tucked in a clear sleeve. The name, Elijah Wilson, sat printed above a photo where the eyes looked the same, attentive without being challenging. Ryan pretended to read longer than he needed. He liked the quiet little dominance in the way a person had to wait while you made a show of scrutiny. Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Wilson, he said finally. We're going to do a safety inspection. The man's mouth moved just enough to be seen as a breath rather than a smile. My equipment was checked at the weigh station 49 miles back, but, of course. He unbuckled, swung down from the cab, and stood where Ryan pointed, in front of the truck, hands visible, body angled toward the cruiser. He did not lean on the bumper. He did not put his hands in his pockets. He looked, Ryan thought, like a man who had practiced making himself easy to police. Dispatch, copy that CDL, Ryan said into the mic as he walked a circle he'd walked 100 times. Name Elijah Wilson. Date of birth. He read it off. 10 seconds later, the reply came back clean. Valid license, no wants or warrants, vehicle registered properly out of Baton Rouge. He opened the trailer's latch and glanced in at the equipment list pinned near the door. Ratchet straps, furniture blankets, a hand truck, empty pallets. The manifest on the clipboard matched a delivery in Montgomery that morning. He knocked a tire with a baton, listened to the thunk, then crouched to run a hand under the trailer skirt where road grit collected. Nothing. He could end it here, a warning about the imaginary tail lamp crack. Be safe. But the thought of Vince's flat eyes and the slow way he said Friday rose like acid. Ryan checked his watch, then keyed his shoulder mic. 2:14 requesting K9 for a probable cause sniff. Mile marker 74. Copy, dispatch said, flat. 2:17 en route. It took 20 minutes for Officer Eric Davis to arrive, and during those 20 minutes, Elijah Wilson stood by the guardrail with the posture of a man willing to be a statue if that made the world simpler. He asked once if he could call his wife, and when Ryan nodded, he spoke in low tones 10 feet from the cruiser where the dash cam could see his mouth but not hear his words. He narrated each movement, the phone from his pocket, the tap to end the call, like a student reciting answers. Davis pulled up with Rex crated in the back. Davis looked younger when he was unsure. The corners of his mouth pulled tight the way they had been his first month. "What have we got?" he asked, eyes on Ryan rather than the driver. "Feel," Ryan said like a weather report. "Logs are too perfect. Drivers too smooth. Let's run Rex." Davis nodded, clipped the leash, gave the dog a low command. Rex's nails clicked on the pavement as he paced the perimeter, tail high, nose sampling the air in a practice sweep. Ryan did the jacket as Rex worked, shrugged it off, draped it over the open driver's side window of the cab, as if to keep dust from the interior while he looked. The jacket fell just so, wide enough to block the dash cam's eye from the angle that would matter. He let his hand slide under the edge of the driver's mattress in the sleeper, found the small storage lip he'd noted on the first pass, and tucked the thick plastic bag deeply into the shadow where the quilted linen frayed. 3 ounces. Not street junk, lab pure, seized from a different man on a different day who had pleaded out and never asked where the missing weight went. He straightened, dusted his palms, and stepped back into the harmless tableau of a trooper checking a truck. The jacket remained where it lay, a dark shoulder sagging over glass. "Sir?" Davis called from the rear of the trailer in a voice big enough to carry. "Can you step back here and tell me what these items are? Just need your explanation for the report." Wilson walked toward Davis, obedient as a commuter heading for a crosswalk light. Ryan saw the moment, as brief as a blink, when the man's eyes flicked from Davis to the cab and took in the windbreaker draped across the window. Noted it, catalogued it. Said nothing. "Rex," Davis said near the cab a minute later, letting the leash go long enough for the dog to circle the driver's door. A slight hand cue, a change in tone. The dog's head snapped towards the seam where the foam met fabric. The paw, learned, rewarded 100 times, scratched. "Alert," Davis announced, voice raised for microphones and gods. "We have an alert." Ryan widened his eyes the way he practiced in the bathroom mirror to look like a man surprised by fate's helping hand. He climbed into the cab, slid a hand where he already knew it would find plastic, and came up with the bag as if it had been waiting for his fingers all afternoon. "Well, well," he said for the camera, for the report, for the rhythm of the lie. "Mr. Wilson, you want to explain this?" Elijah Wilson's composure cracked for the first time. Not a plea, not a stumble, a widening of the eyes that said shock without theater. "That is not mine," he said, each word like a brick laid carefully. "I have never seen that in my life." "They all say that," Ryan replied, already feeling the comfort of a familiar script settling over his nerves. He stepped down, pivoted the man towards the truck, and reached for the cuffs. He used more force than he needed to because force felt like certainty, and certainty was what he needed in that second to drown the little voice that whispered he had just stepped over a line you couldn't see until it was behind you. "You are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute," he said, cuff ratcheting until metal kissed bone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Wilson didn't fight. He didn't hang his head. He turned his face enough to look Ryan in the eyes, and what Ryan saw there wasn't fear and wasn't hate. It was recognition, as if the man had been waiting for this exact moment and cataloged it in advance. Time, place, the cut of Ryan's jaw and the scuff on his left boot. "You've made a mistake you can't undo, officer," he said quietly. Ryan felt a flicker in his gut, the way a muscle twitches after a long run, and then it was gone. He guided the man to the back seat of the cruiser, placed a hand on his head so it wouldn't hit the door frame like he always did, and closed him in a cage that smelled like vinyl and sweat and old fear. He removed the jacket from the cab window, folded it with care, and told himself the sun glare would have ruined the footage anyway. On the shoulder, the light had shifted into the warm part of evening that made everything look kinder than it was. Davis stood by the guardrail, Rex at heel, looking at the bag in Ryan's hand as if it were a rattlesnake that had coiled itself there without help. "Good work," Ryan said, clapping his partner's shoulder. He meant, "Don't ask questions." He meant, "This is how we do things when the paperwork demands a reason." He meant, "We're both in it now." Back in the driver's seat, he keyed his Mick with a thumb that didn't tremble. "Claiborne, 214, he said, voice steady. "One in custody, transportin'." The radio popped in acknowledgement. Traffic hummed past, indifferent and endless. As he pulled onto the highway, Ryan glanced once in the rearview mirror. Elijah Wilson sat with his face turned toward the fading light, jaw set, eyes clear, as if the windshield held a horizon Ryan couldn't see. The words, "You've made a mistake you can't undo," echoed in the cruiser's small air, settling in the corners with the dust. Ryan turned up the radio just enough to drown them. He told himself the hard part was over. He told himself he'd done what needed doing. He told himself a lot of things that sounded truer inside a moving car than they would in any room with four walls and a recorder on the table. By the time the county line sign flashed past, he had already begun writing the report in his head. Nervous behavior, inconsistent answers, canine alert, probable cause, resisted, briefly, body cam malfunction, intermittent. He could see the paragraphs, could feel the keys under his fingers, could taste the relief of closing a file folder on a case that would balance more than one ledger. He didn't see the way the day's last light made the road ahead look like it ended in fire. He didn't know yet how quickly a single line in a single report could unravel into a rope. He didn't know that a voice on a phone in Washington already knew his name. He didn't know that a man in his back seat was not only a driver with neat logs, but a fuse with a name. He drove on, rehearsing the way he'd say, "Just doing my job," if Captain Howard asked a question with too much sincerity in it. He drove on, telling himself Friday would take care of itself now. He drove on, and the cruiser hummed, and the bag of white powder in the evidence pouch sat weightless as a lie until it wasn't. The Claiborne County Sheriff's Office was a squat brick building that smelled of old coffee, copier, toner, and damp uniforms that never fully dried in the lockers. Ryan Miller walked his prisoner inside with the same practiced steps he always used: firm grip on the elbow, cuffs tight enough to leave a mark, but not enough to look like cruelty. He guided Elijah Wilson to the intake desk, ignoring the calm look on the man's face. That calm was beginning to gnaw at him. At booking, Miller began spinning the report the way he always did. Driver displayed nervous behavior, inconsistent answers, he wrote, his pen racing across the lines. Subject resisted momentarily. Body cam malfunctioned intermittently during search. He added details with the precision of a man who had done it too many times to count. The supposed furtive glances, the odor consistent with narcotics, the erratic lane movement. Words became tools, sharper than cuffs, and he wielded them like a craftsman. Yet, even as he wrote, something felt wrong. Wilson wasn't protesting, wasn't pleading. He sat upright on the bench, wrists chained, looking straight ahead as if he were waiting for something inevitable. Around midnight, the door to the station opened and a man in a charcoal suit walked in. He carried no badge, but wore authority like a second skin. "Thomas Hammond," he announced, flashing credentials so clean they practically glowed. "Defense counsel. My client will not answer further questions without me present." Miller stared. A long-haul trucker with a K Street lawyer? Something didn't add up. He felt sweat prick his collar as Hammond strode past him without a glance, whispering something to Wilson that made the older man nod once, almost imperceptibly. The next morning, the case landed on Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Richards' desk. Richards was sharp-eyed, her hair tied back, her office stacked with files and color-coded folders. She read Miller's report, line by line, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. The weights of the seized narcotics didn't match the evidence log. The chain of custody tags were months old, already recorded in another file. The dash cam upload showed a sudden malfunction exactly when Miller claimed the dog had alerted. By noon, she had flagged the case for further review. "Something's wrong here," she told her aide. "Too many holes, too clean where it shouldn't be." That same afternoon, unmarked SUVs rolled into the station lot. Agents in plain clothes filed in, flashing federal IDs. Special Agent Diana Foster, tall, steady, and precise in her movements, requested a room. Within minutes, Miller was seated at a table under fluorescent lights that hummed like bees. Foster laid out a series of photos. "This is the highway camera at mile marker 74, she said calmly. The image showed Wilson's truck driving perfectly within its lane. Miller's report claimed erratic swerving. Next, she slid over a sheet of paper, the evidence bag serial number tied back to a seizure months ago, signed out by Ryan Miller, logged back light. He shifted in his chair, throat dry. "Clerical mistake," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. Across the hall, Elijah Wilson was being escorted out, not to county holding, but to a waiting federal vehicle. U.S. Marshals guided him into the back with the kind of deference that told everyone watching he wasn't just another arrestee. Miller felt the walls close in. First the lawyer, now the feds. The calm in Wilson's eyes suddenly made sense, and it chilled him more than any accusation. By the end of the day, Miller realized something he had never allowed himself to think. This wasn't an ordinary stop gone bad. He hadn't just arrested a trucker. He had stepped into a game already in play, one he didn't understand, and he was no longer holding the cards. The safe house was nothing special from the outside. A bland, single-story structure tucked at the edge of Birmingham, its beige siding identical to 100 other rentals on the block. Inside, however, it buzzed with the quiet order of federal protection. Blinds drawn tight, cameras concealed in vents, and laptops glowing on fold-out tables. Elijah Wilson, no longer cuffed, no longer silent, sat at the kitchen table while 2 U.S. Marshals kept watch by the door. He slipped off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The weight in his shoulders shifted, not in surrender, but in relief. "Name's not Elijah Wilson," he said finally, his voice steady. "It's Marcus Daniels." The marshals exchanged a glance, but they didn't look surprised. They knew. Everyone in the room except the Claiborne officers had known from the beginning. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. It was bait, and Miller had lunged. Special Agent Diana Foster walked in, a slim laptop under her arm. She set it on the table and angled the screen toward Marcus. Video footage filled the display. Ryan Miller's cruiser, the dash cam catching fragmented angles, then freezing as a jacket slid into view. Another feed appeared, sharper, cleaner. A hidden lens mounted inside Marcus's cab, recording everything. The search, the furtive hand tucking a bag under the sleeper lining, the staged alert from the K-9. The evidence was undeniable. "This," Foster said, tapping the screen, "is why you're here." Marcus leaned back, his expression unreadable. He had been waiting for this moment for years. Before witness protection, he had been the chief accountant for Vincent Costello's crime family in Boston. Numbers were his life, clean ledgers hiding dirty empires. When the FBI closed in, Marcus made the choice no one else dared. He flipped. His testimony put Costello and a dozen of his men behind bars for life. For that, he'd earned a new name, new papers, and the promise of safety. But safety had proven a fragile thing. On the road, he had seen the pattern too many times. Black drivers pulled over on flimsy pretexts, searches justified by nervous behavior or furtive movements. Arrests born from planted bags. Marcus had counted 46 stops in 3 years, almost all of them aimed at men who looked like him. He recorded each one. Body language, dash cam tricks, falsified reports. By the time he approached his handlers, the data was overwhelming. The FBI had given the investigation a name: Operation Sundown. Its purpose was clear: expose departments that thrived on profiling and fabrication. Marcus, hidden in plain sight as a trucker, was their instrument. The rigs he drove weren't just semis. They were rolling surveillance units wired with cameras, mics, and telemetry that no corrupt cop could scrub. Claiborne County had been chosen as Target 3, and Ryan Miller had walked right into the trap. Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's office, the pressure built. Rookie Officer Eric Davis was already unraveling under federal questioning. He replayed the stop in his mind. Rex's unnatural alert, the way Miller's jacket had blocked the lens, the bag that appeared where nothing had been. Davis wasn't hardened enough to carry lies into a federal interview room. His hands shook as he asked for a lawyer. His eyes betrayed fear every time an agent said the word conspiracy. Captain Frank Howard fared no better. When news reached him that federal marshals had intervened, his first instinct wasn't loyalty. It was self-preservation. He slammed his office door, muttered about rogue officers, and made calls that agents were already recording. By dusk, it was clear. The captain would sacrifice anyone necessary to shield himself. Back in the safe house, Marcus watched silently as Foster scrolled through months of logged data. Each clip revealed the same tactics: shaky justifications, missing footage, alerts that matched, hand cues, baggies recycled from old cases. "You've done extraordinary work," Foster said, "but Claiborne, this is different. This isn't just about one bad cop. This is systemic. Miller's just the piece we needed to break the wall." Marcus exhaled slowly. He wasn't a man who smiled easily, but there was something close to satisfaction in his eyes. "I told you," he said, "this isn't a few rotten apples. This is the whole tree." For the first time, the mask of calm he'd worn since the arrest slipped, not into fear, but into purpose. His cover, as Elijah Wilson, was gone, but Marcus Daniels had returned, and with him came the reckoning Claiborne County had never seen coming. And miles away, sitting alone in a windowless interview room, Ryan Miller began to realize that the man he thought he'd trapped was, in fact, the one trapping him all along. The interrogation room smelled of cold metal and recycled air, the kind of place where time stretched and the walls themselves seemed to lean in. Ryan Miller sat with his arms crossed, but his jaw betrayed the tension. He had been in rooms like this before, on the other side of the table, leaning into suspects, watching them break. Now the roles were reversed. Special Agent Diana Foster entered with a file so thin it looked almost harmless. She set it down in front of him without opening it. Behind her came Robert Harrison, the special agent in charge, a man whose calm presence filled the room like gravity. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Officer Miller," Foster began, her tone precise, "we have questions about your traffic stop yesterday." Ryan kept his voice level. Everything was by the book. Nervous suspect, K9 alert, controlled substance discovered. Standard procedure. Harrison's eyes didn't move from Miller's face as Foster opened the file and slid across the first photo, a still from the highway camera. Marcus Daniels's semi in perfect alignment, not swerving, not erratic, not a single violation. Miller's report, however, claimed otherwise. Next came the evidence log. Foster tapped a serial number with her pen. This bag was logged 6 months ago, seized in a different case. You signed it out. The return shows the weight was short. Miller's mouth went dry. He opened it, then closed it again. "Clerical error," he muttered, the same phrase he had used the night before. Harrison leaned forward. "No, officer, not a clerical error, a pattern." Across the hall, rookie officer Eric Davis sat in another interview room, his face pale, his hands fidgeting. Davis had lasted only an hour before asking for an attorney, but his voice cracked when he tried to explain the stop. He spoke of Rex's cues, of Miller's jacket draped over the dash cam, of the unease in his stomach when the bag appeared. He didn't confess outright, but he didn't need to. His hesitation was enough. The FBI read fear better than any lie. Meanwhile, Captain Frank Howard was unraveling in his own way. He had always played politics more than law enforcement, and now the politics were turning. When the FBI raided the evidence room with a federal warrant, Howard tried to distance himself, insisting Miller was one bad apple, an overzealous rookie who went too far. But the agents had more. Calls recorded, internal memos, and a notebook Howard had kept, a ledger of methods and results written like insurance. That notebook, intended as leverage, now became the nail in his own coffin. Back in Miller's room, Harrison laid out the final card. He placed a laptop on the table and hit play. The footage filled the screen. Crystal clear video from inside the semi's cab, showing Miller's hand sliding beneath the sleeper lining, tucking the plastic bag into the shadows, then stepping back with the practiced calm of a man who thought no one was watching. The audio captured it all. The jacket sliding across the window, the soft creak of the mattress, the staged alert. Miller's breath caught. His shoulders sagged for the first time. "How?" he started, then stopped. Harrison closed the laptop. "You didn't arrest a trucker," he said evenly. "You compromised a protected federal witness under WITSEC. Marcus Daniels has been in hiding for years, testifying against the Costello crime family. You almost blew an operation we've run for 3. He paused, letting the weight sink in. Do you understand the scale of what you've done? Ryan said nothing. His mind replayed the stop, the calm look in Daniel's eyes, the words he'd spoken. You've made a mistake you can't undo. Foster spoke again, her voice clipped. You have 2 choices. Cooperate fully or face 20 years for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice, and that's before the civil rights charges. Miller's heart pounded. He thought of Melissa, of the house of Vince Maroney's cold stare when he failed to deliver. He thought of the badge on his chest, now nothing more than a weight pulling him down. He could stay silent and drown, or he could talk and drag others with him. His voice cracked when it finally came. What do you want to know? The collapse had begun. The federal courthouse in Birmingham was packed. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing every time a defendant was led inside. The grand jury had become a public stage, and the star witness was the very officer who once believed himself untouchable. Ryan Miller sat at the witness table, sweat beading at his hairline despite the air conditioning. Shackled by guilt more than chains, he spoke into the microphone with a voice stripped of swagger. Yes, he said, answering the prosecutor's question. Captain Howard knew. He told us to keep numbers high, and if that meant cutting corners, so be it. He detailed everything, the quotas disguised as proactivity, the profiling of black drivers, the jacket trick to block cameras, the staged K-9 alerts, the recycled evidence bags. Each word landed like a hammer against the department's foundation. In exchange for cooperation, he would serve a reduced sentence. But no plea deal could restore what he had lost. The fallout spread quickly. 14 Claiborne officers were indicted, including Howard and the chief of police. Years of cases were reopened, convictions overturned, families reunited with loved ones who should never have been taken from them. The Department of Justice announced a sweeping review of traffic stops across the state, and civil rights lawyers filed lawsuits that shook county budgets to their core. For Claiborne, reform was not optional. It was survival. A civilian oversight board was created, staffed by pastors, teachers, and community leaders who had lived too long in fear of flashing lights behind them. Every patrol car was outfitted with body cams that uploaded directly to cloud storage beyond local control. Consent for searches had to be documented on camera, clear and voluntary. The culture of numbers was stripped away, replaced by policies measured in trust, not arrests. Into this rebuilding stepped Marcus Daniels. No longer hidden behind an alias, he accepted a role as an advisor to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Enforcement Initiative. He knew the danger of visibility, but he also knew the cost of silence. Systems bend toward what they measure, he told a packed auditorium. If they measure arrests, they'll get arrests. If they measure justice, they might, finally, get justice. Years later, the Claiborne Police Department looked unrecognizable. Chief Tanya Washington, the first black woman to lead the force, oversaw training programs on constitutional policing and bias recognition. Officers were seen walking neighborhoods, not prowling for stops. Citizens began to speak of trust in the same breath as law enforcement, a word that once seemed impossible. And yet, for all the progress, the scars remained. Families who had lost years to false charges could not reclaim them. Communities bruised by decades of profiling carried the memory in every cautious glance at a cruiser. One quiet evening, Marcus sat in a diner booth, sipping coffee when the bell over the door chimed. Ryan Miller entered, older, thinner, his eyes dulled by prison time. He carried himself with the humility of a man who no longer expected respect. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment, No handshakes, no false pleasantries. Just two men bound by a single violent truth. "I don't expect forgiveness," Miller said finally, his voice rough. "You won't get it," Marcus replied, "but you can still do something with what's left of your life." Miller nodded. He now spoke at police academies, not as a hero but as a warning. He told rookies about the path he had taken, about how small shortcuts become gaping holes, about how one lie can bury a career, a family, a soul. He told them about the man he once tried to destroy and how that man destroyed the system instead. As the two men sat in the diner, the hum of conversation around them was ordinary, almost peaceful. The world hadn't healed, not completely, but it had shifted, because one witness chose to speak, because one officer chose, too late, to tell the truth, and because a system that had long devoured its weakest had finally been forced into the light. Justice had not been perfect, it had not been clean, but it had been real, and in America sometimes that was the beginning of something better. This story shows how quickly everything can change when the truth comes to light. Share your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe for more gripping stories.